And
Hello. All right, I think I'm just about ready to get started. So, don't worry, Tony. We're gonna start a little lighter. The first short story that I have set up is a little less intense, and I picked it entirely for its title. That, and I just thought it was kind of like weird and I mean, it'll be an example. Like so a lot of the things I want to read are going to be good, but some of them aren't. And I I mean, I like weird, kind of not great stuff, because it's sometimes pretty interesting. So we'll just see what we think about that. Thank you. I don't even remember where I got it. It's just some clip from a Pokemon, an episode of the Pokemon anime. I've kind of flip flopped on having music in the background, but I would have to make sure it was all public domain or unlicensed or whatever. So probably not. Although I'm not sure if people would prefer to just not have music anyway. Let's let's move on to our first reading thing. Can somebody say something in the chat real quick, just so I can make sure the chat box thingus is set up? Something. Okay, that's not exactly how I wanted it. Now's as good a time as any to do a little bit of troubleshooting on that. E. Can I just lower the font? Oh, good. It retroactively does that. Good. Yes. God damn it, Mooney! You stole the first joke I was gonna make. Everybody likes Earthbound, right? So this is a piece of pulp fiction from Galaxy from 1963. It's pretty short, but let's just get into it. Oh well, you know what? Yeah, it's interesting. So, but if you haven't already done so, I would appreciate any follows. I'm trying to get up to 40 followers to get affiliate status. If you have anybody you could pass the stream around to, I'd also really appreciate it. I don't want to spend. I feel really self conscious about doing self plugging, so I think I'll just leave that at that. Also, how's our mic quality here? Are we good? Okay, thank you, Tony. Have your volume up. How about now? I moved a little bit closer. I can also just boost. Where's this? Do you have this turned down a little bit? Let me get boosted. How are we? How are we? I upped it by 5 decibels. Is that good? I also don't know how long the latency is. Okay, awesome. All right, so Earthbound. by Lester Del Rey. I'm gonna just stop myself from reading that in the obvious way that Mooney already beat me to. He wanted above anything else to go into space. He had been waiting for it a long time. It was hours after the last official ceremony before Clifton could escape the crowd of planet lovers and their babblings, their eligible daughters, their stupid self admiration. They'd pay through the nose to get him here, and they meant to get their money's worth. The exit led only to a little balcony, but it seemed to be deserted. He took a deep breath of the night air, and his eyes moved unconsciously toward the stars. Coming back to Earth had been a mistake, but he needed the money. Space Products Unlimited wanted a real deep space hero to help celebrate its 100th anniversary. He had just finished the regulation of Rigel, so the regulation of Rigel, so he'd been picked. Damn them and their silly speeches and awards, and damn Earth! What was one planet when there were a billion up there among the stars? From the other side of a potted plant there was a soft sigh. Clifton swung his head and then relaxed as he saw the other man was not looking at him. The eyes behind the dark glasses were directed toward the sky. Aldebaran, Sirius, Deneb, Alpha Centauri, the voice whispered. It was a high-pitched voice with an odd accent. There was a poetry of ancient yearning behind it. Yearning in it. He was a small, shriveled old man. His shoulders were bent. A long beard and the dark glasses covered most of his face, but could not entirely conceal the deep wrinkles, even in the moonlight. Here, let me adjust my mic a little bit. Slouched over a little bit. Okay. Clifton felt a sudden touch of pity and moved closer, without quite knowing why. Didn't I see you on the platform? Yeah, your memory is very good, Captain. I was awarded publicly for 50 years of faithful service making space boots. Well, I was always a good cobbler, and perhaps my boots helped some men out there. The old man's hand swept toward the stars, then fell back to grip the railing tightly. They gave me a gold watch, though time means nothing to me. And a cheap world cruise ticket, as if there was any spot on this world I could still want to see. He laughed harshly. Forgive me if I sound bitter, but you see, I've never been off Earth. Clifton stared at him incredulously. But everyone but me, the old man said. Oh, I tried. I was utterly weary of Earth, and I looked at the stars and dreamed. But I failed the early rigid physicals, and when things were easier, I tried again. A plague grounded the first ship. A strike delayed another. Then one exploded on the pad, and only a few on board were saved. It was then I realized I was meant to wait here on Earth, and nowhere else. So I stayed, making space boots. Pity and impulse forced unexpected words from Clifton's lips. I'm taking off for Rigel again in 4 hours. There's a space cabin on the Marylou. You're welcome. You're coming with me. The old hand that gripped his arm was oddly gentle. Bless you, Captain, but it would never work. I'm under orders to remain here. Nobody can order a man grounded forever. You're coming with me if I have to drag you, Mr. Ahasur... That is a name. Ahasuerus. The old man hesitated, as expecting the name to mean something. Then he sighed and lifted his dark glasses. Clifton met the other's gaze for less than a second. Then his own eyes dropped, though memory of what he had seen was already fading. He vaulted over the balcony railing and began running away from Ahasuerus, toward his ship and the unconfined reaches of space. Behind him, the eternal wanderer tarried and waited. So that's Earthbound. It's this weird melancholy sort of I don't know. Maybe there's some sort of reference about this that I'm missing, but it's just weird. Yeah, they're gay. Absolutely. I mean, I love how up his own ass the guy is at the beginning. Yeah, there's a lot. There's a lot in this little bit. Just little chunky chunk. I mean, wouldn't you? Okay, so let's get into the second reading I have planned here. This one is a little bit longer. See, that's not on there at all, is it? No, it's not good. Okay, so this is the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Uh, for those of you who are not familiar with this, I feel like I should probably give a content warning out at the start. This is a short story that deals with some pretty heavy themes of mental illness and sexism, and also just some disturbing stuff. I'm thinking of how I can possibly articulate that without spoiling it. Yeah, it's really good though. Um, just be forewarned of those themes and gross wallpaper and spooky old ladies. I almost feel like I do. I'm kind of reading this, and I almost feel like I do want something behind this one. Hold on. Let's see if I can't find something appropriate real quick. Let's see. That's a little too on the nose, isn't it? Yeah, no, I don't like that. That's too it's too obvious. You know what? We'll just get going. If anybody has any suggestions for music, I'll take that. How about just link it in or DM it to me? I think Mooney should be able to take links at least. Spooky music 10 hours. Is that a thing? Is it royalty free? Is that actually a thing? Oh, there's this. Oh dear. There we go. I don't want it to be too loud, so let me know if that's overpowering. Okay, you were just joking. Yeah, I don't know if this is Spotify linked, so that's probably a no. I trusted you, Mooney. How could you? Well, whatever. We'll just continue as we are. Take a little sip of me water. Okay, I'll keep that in mind. It might have been fine. I just don't want to play anything that will get the VOD muted. Okay, so let's see here. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It is very seldom that mere ordinary people like John and myself secure ancestral halls for the summer. A colonial mansion, a hereditary estate, I would say a haunted house, and reach the height of romantic felicity. But that would be asking too much of fate. Still, I will proudly declare that there is something queer about it. Else, why should it be let so cheaply? And why have stood so long untenanted? John laughs at me, of course, but one expects that in marriage. John is practical to the extreme. He has no patience with faith, an intense horror of superstition, and he scoffs openly of any talk of things not to be felt and seen and put down in figures. John is a physician, and perhaps, I would not say it to a living soul, of course, but this is dead paper and a great relief to my mind, perhaps that is one reason why I do not get well faster. You see, he does not believe I am sick. And what can one do? If a physician of high standing and one's own husband assures friends and relatives that there really is nothing the matter with one but temporary nervous depression, a slight hysterical tendency, what is one to do? My brother is also a physician and also of high standing, and he says the same thing. So I take phosphates, or phosphites, whichever it is, and tonics, and journeys, and air, and exercise, and am absolutely forbidden to work until I am well again. Personally, I disagree with their ideas. Personally, I believe that congenial work with excitement and change would do me good. But what is one to do? I did write for a while in spite of them, but it does exhaust me a good deal, having to be so sly about it, or else meet with heavy opposition. I sometimes fancy that in my condition, if I had less opposition and more society and stimulus, but John says that is the very worst thing but John says the very worst thing I can do is think about my condition, and I confess it always makes me feel bad. So I will let it alone and talk about the house. The most beautiful place. It is quite alone, standing well back from the road, quite 3 miles from the village. It makes me think of English palaces that you read about, for there are hedges and walls and gates that lock, and lots of separate little houses for the gardeners and people. There is a delicious garden. I never saw such a garden. Large and shady, full of box-bordered paths, and lined with long grape-covered arbors with seats under them. There were greenhouses, too, but they are all broken now. There was some legal trouble, I believe, something about the heirs and co-heirs. Anyhow, the place has been empty for years. That spoils my ghostliness, I am afraid, but I don't care. There's something strange about the house. I can feel it. I even said so to John one moonlit evening, but he said what I felt was a draught and shut the window. I get unreasonably angry with John sometimes. I'm sure I never used to be so sensitive. I think it is due to this nervous condition. But John says if I feel so, I shall neglect proper self-control, so I take pains to control myself, before him at least. And that makes me very tired. I do not like our rooms a bit. I wanted one downstairs that opened on the piazza and had roses all over the window, and such pretty old-fashioned chintz hangings, but John would not hear of it. He said there was only one window and not room for 2 beds, nor near enough room for him if he took another. He is very careful and loving and hardly lets me stir without special direction. I have a scheduled prescription for each hour of the day. He takes all care from me, so I feel basely ungrateful not to value it more. He said we came here solely on my account, that I was to have perfect rest and all the air I could get. Your exercise depends on your strength, my dear, he said, and your food somewhat on your appetite, but air you can absorb all the time. So we took the nursery at the top of the house. It is a big, airy room, the whole floor nearly with windows that look. Oh, like the room is the whole floor, damn. With windows that look all ways, and air and sunshine galore. It was a nursery first, then a playground and gymnasium, I should judge, for the windows were barred for the little children, and there are rings and things in the walls. The paint and paper look as if a boys' school had used it. It is stripped off, the paper, in great patches all around the head of my bed, about as far as I can reach, and in a great place on the other side of the room low down. I never saw a worse paper in my life. One of those sprawling, flamboyant patterns committing every artistic sin. It is dull enough to confuse the eye in following, pronounced enough and to constantly irritate and provoke study, and when you follow the lame, uncertain curves for a little distance, they suddenly commit suicide, plunge off at outrageous angles, destroy themselves in unheard of contradictions. The color is repellent, almost revolting, a smoldering, unclean yellow, strangely faded by the slow-turning sunlight. It is a dull, yet lurid orange in some places, a sickly sulphur tint in others. No wonder the children hated it. I should hate it myself if I had to live in this room long. There comes John. I must put this away. He hates me having write a word. We have been here 2 weeks, and I haven't felt like writing before since that first day. I'm sitting by the window now, up in this atrocious nursery, and there's nothing to hinder my writing as much as I please, save lack of strength. John is away all day, and even some nights when his cases are serious. I'm glad my case is not serious. But these nervous troubles are dreadfully depressing. John does not know how much I really suffer. He knows there is no reason to suffer, and that satisfies him. Of course, it is only nervousness. It does weigh on me, so not to do my duty in any way. I meant to be such a help to John, such a real rest and comfort, and here I am, a comparative burden already. No one would believe what an effort it is to do what little I am able to. Able to dress and entertain and order things. It is fortunate Mary is so good with the baby, such a dear baby. And yet I cannot be with him. It makes me so nervous. I suppose John never was nervous in his life. He laughs at me about this wallpaper. At first he meant to repaper the room, but afterwards he said that I was letting it get the better of me, and nothing was worse for a nervous patient than to give in to such fancies. He said that after the wallpaper was changed, it would be the heavy bedstead, and then the barred windows, and then the gate at the head of the stairs, and so on. You know, the place is doing you good, he said, and really, dear, I don't care to renovate the house just for a 3 months rental. Then do let us go downstairs, I said. They're such pretty rooms. He then took me in his arms and carried me and called me a blessed little goose, and said he would go down cellar if I wished, and have it whitewashed into the bargain. But he is right enough about the beds and windows and things. It is as airy and comfortable a room as anyone need wish, and of course, I would not be so silly as to make him uncomfortable just for a whim. I'm really getting quite fond of the big room, but all that horrid paper. Out of one window I can see the garden, those mysterious deep-shaded arbors, the riotous old-fashioned flowers, and bushes and gnarly trees. Out of another I get a lovely view of the bay, and a little private wharf belonging to the estate. There is a beautiful shaded lane that runs down there from the house. I always fancy I see people walking these numerous paths and arbors, but John has cautioned me not to give way to fancy in the least. He says that with my imaginative power and habit of story-making, a nervous weakness like mine is sure to lead to all manner of excited fancies, and that I ought to use my will and good sense to check the tendency. So I try. One moment. I think sometimes that if I were only well enough to write a little, it would relieve the press of ideas and rest me. But I find I get pretty tired when I try. It is so discouraging not to have any advice and companionship about my work. When I get really well, John says we will ask Cousin Henry and Julia down for a long visit, but he says he would as soon put fireworks in my pillowcase as let me have those stimulating people about now. I wish I could get well faster. But I must not think about that. The paper looks to me as if it knew what vicious influence it has. There is a recurrent spot where the pattern lolls like a broken neck, and two bulbous eyes stare at you upside down. I get positively angry with the impertinence of it and the everlastingness. Up and down and sideways they crawl, and those absurd, unblinking eyes are everywhere. There is one place where two breaths didn't match, and the eyes go all up and down one line, one a little higher than the other. I never saw so much expression in an inanimate thing before, and we all know how much expression they have. I used to lie awake as a child and get more entertainment and terror out of blank walls and plain furniture than most children could find in a toy store. I remember what a kindly wink of the knob of our old excuse me. I remember what a kindly wink the knobs of our big old bureau used to have, and there was one chair that always seemed like a strong friend. I used to feel that if any of the other things looked too fierce, I could always hop into that chair and be safe. The furniture in this room is no worse than inharmonious. However, for we had to bring it all from downstairs. I suppose when this was used as a playroom, they had to take the nursery things out, and no wonder. I never saw such ravages as the children have made here. The wallpaper, as I said before, is torn off in spots, and it sticketh closer than a brother. They must have had perseverance as well as hatred. When the floor is scratched and then the floor is scratched and gouged and splintered, the plaster itself is dug out here and there, and this great heavy bed, which is all we found in the room, looks as if it has been through the wars. But I don't mind it a bit, only the paper. There comes John's sister, such a dear girl as she is, and so careful of me. I must not let her find me writing. She is a perfect and enthusiastic housekeeper, and hopes for no better profession. I verily believe she thinks it is the writing that is making me sick. But I can write when she is out, and see her a long way off from these windows. There is one that commands the road, a lovely, shaded, winding road, and one that looks off over the country. A lovely country, too, full of great elms and velvet meadows. The wallpaper has a kind of sub-pattern in a different shade, a particularly irritating one, for you can only see it in certain lights, and not clearly then. But in the places where it isn't faded, and where the sun is just so, I can see a strange, provoking, formless sort of figure that seems to sulk about behind that silly and conspicuous front design. There's sister on the stairs. Yeah, Tony, it exhausts her to write, and as well, they're sort of afraid it will stir up her nervousness, get her like thinking about things, but like mostly it's that they want her to only lie in the bed and relax and get better. Well, the 4th of July is over. The people are gone, and I am tired out. John thought it might do me good to see a little company, so we've just had Mother and Nellie and the children down for a week. Of course, I didn't do a thing. Jenny sees to everything now. But it tired me all the same. John says if I don't pick up faster, he shall send me to the Veer Mickle in the fall. Veer Mickle? Veer Mitchell? But I don't want to go there at all. I had a friend who was in his hands once, and she says he is just like John and my brother, only more so. Besides, it is such an undertaking to go so far. I don't feel as if it is worthwhile to turn my hand over for anything, and I'm getting dreadfully fretful and querulous. I cry at nothing, and cry most of the time. Of course, I don't when is here, or anybody else, but when I am alone. And I am alone a good deal just now. John is kept in town very often by serious cases, and Ginny is good and lets me alone when I want her to. So I walk a little in the garden or down that lovely lane, sit on the porch under the roses, and lie down up here for a good deal. I'm getting really fond of the room in spite of the wallpaper. Perhaps because of the wallpaper. It dwells in my mind so. I lie here on this great immovable bed, it is nailed down, I believe, and follow that pattern about by the hour. It is as good as gymnastics, I assure you. I start, we'll say, at the bottom, down in the corner over where it has not been touched, and I determine for the thousandth time that I will follow that pointless pattern to some sort of conclusion. I know a little of the principles of design, and I know this thing was not arranged on any laws of radiation or alternation or repetition or symmetry or anything else I've ever heard of. It is repeated, of course, by the breaths, but not otherwise. Looking at it in one way, each breadth stands alone. The bloated curves and flourishes, a kind of debased Romanesque with delirium tremens, go waddling up and down in isolated columns of fatuity. But on the other hand, they connect diagonally, and the sprawling outlines run off in great slanted waves of optic horror, like a lot of wallowing seaweeds in full chase. The whole thing goes horizontally, too, at least it seems so, and I exhaust myself in trying to distinguish the order of its going in that direction. They have used a horizontal breadth for a frieze, and that adds wonderfully to the confusion. There is one end of the room where it is almost intact, and there, when the cross lights fade and the low sun shines directly upon it, I can almost fancy radiation after all. The impermeable grotesques seem to form around a common center and rush off into headlong plunges of equal distraction. It makes me tired to follow it. I will take a nap, I guess. I don't know why I should write this. I don't want to. I don't feel able. And I know John would think it absurd, but I must say what I feel and think in some way. It is such a relief. But the effort is getting to be greater than the relief. Half the time now I'm awfully lazy and lie down ever so much. John says I mustn't lose my strength, and has me take cod liver oil and lots of tonics and things, to say nothing of ale and wine and rare meat. Dear John, he loves me very deeply and hates to have me sick. I tried to have a real earnest, reasonable talk with him the other day, and tell him how I wish he would let me go and make a visit to Cousin Henry and Julia. But he said I wasn't able to go, nor able to stand it after I got here. And I did not make it out to be a very good case for myself, for I was crying before I had finished. It is getting to be a great effort for me to think straight. Just this nervous weakness, I suppose. And dear John gathered me up in his arms and just carried me upstairs and laid me on the bed and sat by me and read to me till it tired my head. He said I was his darling and his comfort and all he had, and that I must take care of myself for his sake and keep well. He says no one but myself can help me out of it, and that I must use my will and self-control and not let any silly fancies run away with me. There's one comfort. The baby is well and happy, and does not have to occupy this nursery with this horrid wallpaper. If we had not used it, that blessed child would have. What a fortunate escape. Why, I wouldn't have a child of mine, an impressionable little thing, live in such a room for the world. I never thought of it before, but it is lucky that John kept me here after all. I can stand it so much easier than a baby, you see. Of course, I never mention it to them anymore. I'm too wise, but I keep watch of it all the same. There are things in that paper that nobody knows but me, or ever will. Behind that outside pattern, the dim shapes get clearer every day. It is always the same shape, only very numerous. And it is like a woman stooping down and creeping about behind that pattern. I don't like it a bit. I wonder, I begin to think, I wish John would take me away from here. One thing I would like to point out that was not clear to me on my first reading, when the author uses the word creeping, um, the modern sort of understanding of creeping is sort of like to sneak. Um, in this meaning, she means to creep like a bug, so like to crawl like a bug. Just mentioning that, not that it will be relevant. It is so hard to talk with John about my case, because he is so wise and because he loves me so. But I tried it last night. It was moonlight. The moon shines in all around just as the sun does. I hate to see it sometimes. It creeps so slowly and always comes in one window or another. John was asleep and I hated to waken him, so I kept still and watched the moonlight on that undulating wallpaper until I felt creepy. Creepy like unsettled, like a bug walked over your arm, like ugh. The faint figure behind seemed to shake the pattern as if she wanted to get out. I got up softly and went to feel and see if the paper did move, and when I came back, John was awake. "What is it, little girl?" he said. "Don't go walking about like that. You'll get cold." I thought it was a good time to talk, so I told him that I really was not gaining here, and that I wished he would take me away. "Why, darling," said he, "our lease will be up in 3 weeks, and I can't see how to leave before. The repairs are not done at home, and I cannot possibly leave town with just now. Of course, if you were in any danger, I could and would, but you really are better, dear, whether you can see it or not. I am a doctor, dear, and I know. You are gaining flesh and color, your appetite is better. I feel really much easier about you." "I don't weigh a bit more," said I, "nor as much, and my appetite may be better in the evening when you are here, but it is worse in the morning when you are away." "Bless her little heart," he said with a big hug. "She shall be as sick as she pleases. But now let's improve the shining hours by going to sleep, and talk about it in the morning." "And you won't go away?" I asked gloomily. "Why, how can I, dear? It is only 3 weeks more, and we will take a nice little trip of a few days while Jenny is getting the house ready. Really, dear, you are better." Yeah, John's kind of a shitty doctor. I mean, he's probably fine by the standards of his time. This was in 1908, I think. I forgot to check the date. Um, Better in body, perhaps, I began, and stopped short, for he sat up straight and looked at me with such a stern, reproachful look that I could not say another word. "My darling," said he, "I beg of you, for my sake, and for our child's sake, as well as for your own, that you will never for one instant let that idea into your mind. There is nothing so dangerous, so fascinating to a temperament like yours. It is a false and foolish fancy. Can you not trust me as a physician when I tell you so?" So, of course, I said no more on that score, and we went to sleep before long. He thought I was asleep first, but I wasn't. I lay there for hours trying to decide whether that front pattern or the back pattern really did move together or separately. On a pattern like this, by daylight there was a lack of sequence, a defiance of law. It is a constant irritant to a normal mind. The color is hideous enough, and unreliable enough, and infuriating enough, but the pattern is torturing. You think you have mastered it, but just as you get well underway in following, it turns back somersault, and there you are. It slaps you in the face, knocks you down, and tramples upon you. It is like a bad dream. The outside pattern is a florid arabesque, reminding one of a fungus. If you can imagine a toadstool in joints, an interminable string of toadstools budding and sprouting in endless convulsions, why, that is something like it. That is sometimes. There is one marked peculiarity about this paper, a thing nobody seems to notice but myself, and that is it changes as the light changes. When the sun shoots in through the east window, I always watch for that long first straight ray. It changes so quickly that I can never quite believe it. That is why I always watch it. By moonlight, the moon shines in all night when there is a moon, I wouldn't know it was the same paper. At night, in any kind of light, in twilight, candlelight, lamplight, and worst of all by moonlight, it becomes bars. The outside pattern, I mean, and the woman behind it is as plain as can be. I didn't realize for a long time what the thing that showed behind, that dim sub-pattern, what the thing was that showed behind, that dim sub-pattern, but now I am quite sure it is a woman. By daylight she is subdued, quiet. I fancy it is the pattern that keeps her so still. It is so puzzling, and it keeps me quiet by the hour. I lie down ever so much now. John says it is good for me, and to sleep all I can. Indeed, he started the habit by making me lie down for an hour after each meal. It is a very bad habit, I'm convinced, for, you see, I don't sleep. And that cultivates deceit, for I don't tell him I'm awake. Oh no. In fact, I'm getting a little afraid of John. He seems very queer sometimes, and even Ginny has an inexplicable look. It strikes me occasionally, just as scientific a hypothesis, that perhaps it is the paper. I have watched John when he did not know I was looking, and come into the room suddenly on the most innocent excuses, and I've caught him several times looking at the paper. And Jenny too. I caught Jenny with her hand on it once. She didn't know I was in the room, and when I asked her in a very quiet voice, with the most restrained manner possible, what she was doing with the paper, she turned around as if she had been caught stealing, and looked quite angry, and asked me why I should frighten her so. And then she said that the paper stained everything it touched, that she had found yellow smooches on all my clothes and John's, and that she wished we would be more careful. Did that not sound innocent? But I know she was studying that pattern, and I have determined that nobody shall find it out but myself. Life is very much more exciting now than it used to be. You see, I have something more to expect, to look forward to watch. I really do eat better, and am more quiet than I was. John is so pleased to see me improve. He laughed a little the other day, and said I seemed to be flourishing in spite of my wallpaper. I turned it off with a laugh. I had no intention of telling him it's because of the wallpaper. He would make fun of me. He might even want to take me away. I don't want to leave now until I found it out. There is a week more, and I think that will be enough. I'm feeling ever so much better. I don't sleep much at night, for it is so interesting to watch developments, but I sleep a good deal in the daytime. In the daytime, it is tiresome and perplexing. There are always new shoots on the fungus, and new shades of yellow all over it. I cannot keep count of them, though I have tried conscientiously. It is the strangest yellow, that wallpaper. It makes me think of all the yellow things I ever saw. Not beautiful ones like buttercups, but old, foul, bad yellow things. There is something else about that paper. The smell. I noticed it the moment we came into the room, but with so much air and sun it was not bad. Now we've had a week of fog and rain, and whether the windows are open or not, the smell is there. It creeps all over the house. I find it hovering in the dining room, skulking in the parlor, hiding in the hall, lying in wait for me on the stairs. It gets into my hair. Even when I go to ride, if I turn my head suddenly and surprise it, there is that smell. Such a peculiar odor, too. I've spent hours trying to analyze it, to find what it smelled like. It is not bad, at first, and very gentle, but quite the subtlest, most enduring odor I've ever met. In this damp weather, it is awful. I wake up in the night and find it hanging over me. It used to disturb me at first. I thought seriously of burning the house to reach the smell. But now I am used to it. The only thing I can think of that, the only thing I can think of that is it is like the color. That sentence threw me for a loop. But now I am used to it. The only thing I can think of that it is like the color of the paper, a yellow smell. There's a very funny mark on this wall, low down near the mopboard. A streak that runs along the room. It goes behind every piece of furniture except the bed. A long, straight, even smooch, as if it had been rubbed over and over. I wonder how it was done, and who did it, and what they did it for. Round and round and round, round and round and round. It makes me dizzy. Yes, Tony, author X wallpaper. That's where this is going. You've solved the riddle. I really have discovered something at last. Although watching so much at night when it changes so, I have finally found out. The front pattern does move, and no wonder the woman behind shakes it. Sometimes I think there are a great many women behind, and sometimes only one, and she crawls around fast with and her crawling shakes it all over. Then, in the very bright spots, she keeps still, and in the very shady spots, she just takes hold of the bars and shakes them hard. And she is all the time trying to climb through. But nobody can climb through that pattern. It strangles so. I think that is why it has so many heads. They get through, and then the pattern strangles them off and turns them upside down and makes their eyes white. If those heads were covered or taken off, it would not be so bad, not be half so bad. I think that woman gets out in the daytime. And I'll tell you why. Privately, I've seen her. I can see her out of every one of my windows. It is the same woman I know, for she is always creeping, and most women do not creep by daylight. God, I love that line. Most women do not creep by daylight. You can take that to the bank. I see her on that long shaded lane, creeping up and down. I see her in those dark grape arbors, creeping all around the garden. I see her on that long road under the trees, creeping along, and when a carriage comes, she hides under the blackberry vines, excuse me. I don't blame her a bit. It must be very humiliating to be caught creeping by daylight. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I can't do it at night, for I know John would suspect something at once. And John is so queer now that I don't want to irritate him. I wish he would take another room. Besides, I don't want anybody to get that woman out at night but myself. I often wonder if I could see her out of all the windows at once. But turn as fast as I can only see her out of one at a time. And though I always see her, she may be able to creep faster than I can turn. I've watched her sometimes away off in the open country, creeping as fast as a cloud shadow on the high wind. Again, remember crawling, so I think hands and knees or hands and feet. Like a bug. If only that top pattern could be gotten off from the under one. I mean to try it, little by little. I have found out another funny thing, but I shan't tell it this time. It does not do to trust people too much. There are only 2 more days to get this paper off, and I believe John is beginning to notice. I don't like the look in his eyes. And I have heard him ask Jenny a lot of professional questions about me. She had a very good report to give. She said I slept a good deal in the daytime. John knows I don't sleep very well at night, for all I'm so quiet. He asked me all sorts of questions, too, and pretended to be very loving and kind, as if I couldn't see through him. Still, I don't wonder he acts so, sleeping under this paper for 3 months. It only interests me, but I feel sure John and Ginny are secretly affected by it. Hurrah! This is the last day, but it is enough. John is to stay in town overnight and won't be out until this evening. Ginny wanted to sleep with me, the sly thing, but I told her I should undoubtedly rest better for a night all alone. That was clever, for I really wasn't alone a bit. As soon as it was moonlight and that poor thing began to crawl and shake the pattern, I got up and ran to help her. I pulled and she shook. I shook and she pulled, and before morning we had peeled off yards of that paper, a strip about as high as my head and half around the room. And then, when the sun came and that awful pattern began to laugh at me, I declared it would finish today. We go away tomorrow, and they are moving all of my furniture down again to leave things as they were before. Ginny looked at the wall in amazement, but I told her merrily that I did it out of pure spite at the vicious thing. She laughed and said she wouldn't mind doing it herself, but I must not get tired. Ooh, how she betrayed herself that time. But I am here, and no person touches this paper but me, not alive. She tried to get me out of the room. It was too patient. Patent? Too patent? Too obvious. Oh, it was too obvious. But I said she was so quiet and empty and I said it was so quiet and empty and clean now that I believed I would lie down again and sleep all I could, and not to wake me even for dinner. I would call when I woke. So now she is gone, and the servants are gone, and the things are gone, and there is nothing left but that great bedstead nailed down and the canvas mattress we found on it. We shall sleep downstairs tonight and take the boat home tomorrow. I quite enjoy the room, now it is bare again. How those children did tear about here. This bedstead is fairly gnawed. But I must get to work. I have locked the door and thrown the key down the front path. I don't want to go out. I don't want to have anyone come in till John comes. I want to astonish him. I've got a rope up here that even Jenny did not find. If that woman does get out and tries to get away, I can tie her. But I forgot I could not reach far without anything to stand on. This bed will not move. I tried to lift and push it until I was lame, and then I got so angry I bit off a little piece of one corner, but it hurt my teeth. Then I peeled off all the paper I could reach standing on the floor. It sticks horribly and the pattern just enjoys it. All those strangled heads and bulbous eyes and waddling fungus growths just streak with derision. I am getting angry enough to do something desperate. To jump out of the window would be an admirable exercise, but the bars are too strong to even try. Besides, I wouldn't do it. Of course not. I know well enough that a step like that is improper and might be misconstrued. I don't like to look out of the windows even. There are so many of those creeping women, and they creep so fast. I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper. I wonder if they all come out of that wallpaper as I did. But I am securely fastened now by my well-hidden rope. You don't get me out in the road there. I suppose I shall have to get back behind the pattern when it comes night, and that is hard. It is so pleasant to be out in this great room and creep around as I please. I don't want to go outside. I won't, even if Ginny asks me to. For outside you have to creep on the ground, and everything is green instead of yellow. But here I can creep smoothly on the floor, and my shoulder just fits in that long smooch along the wall, so I cannot lose my way. Why, there's John at the door. It's no use, young man. You can't open it. How he does call and pound. Now he's crying for an axe. It would be a shame to break down that beautiful door. John, dear, I said in my gentlest voice, the key is down by the front steps, under a plantain leaf. That silenced him for a few moments. Then he said, very quietly indeed, Open the door, my darling. I can't, said I. The key is down by the front door, under a plantain leaf. And then I said it again, several times, very gently and slowly, and said it so often that he had to go and see. And he got it, of course, and came in. He stopped short by the door. What is the matter? He cried. For God's sake, what are you doing? I kept on creeping just the same, but I looked at him over my shoulder. I've got out at last, said I, in spite of you and Ginny, and I pulled off most of the paper, so you can't put me back. Now, why should that man have fainted? But he did, and right across my path by the wall, so that I had to creep over him every time. And that's the Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. Yeah, it fucking it ramps up right at the end, huh? Yeah, so I think it's a very interesting story. It's this sort of like, yeah, she did actually sort of leave him to become the woman behind the wallpaper. Oh man, it's sort of like, early 1900s, the way that people treated mental illnesses, maybe making them worse. Oh man, I forgot it had that fucking banger of an ending. I always lock the door when I creep by daylight. I don't know about you folks. I think I'm going to take a short break, but I will be right back. Thank you, Mooney. I was worried about. I stumbled over a little bit of it, but, like, yeah. Alright, be right back. Okay, I am back. So, you guys like the yellow wallpaper? Alright, so up next, I have one more short story. This one up here on the screen, The Revealing Pattern by Alvin Heiner. Another little sci-fi pulp piece. And then I actually have a choice. I have a couple of long-form horror stories. One is an anthology, um, and then two are just, multi-chapter books. Um, that we will definitely not finish tonight, but I want to see what you guys think about, like, what we want to listen, like, hear sort of going forward. We'll get into those after we finish the revealing pattern. Okay, so the revealing pattern by Alvin Heiner. The Reamer mansion was on trial. It announced its own verdict: guilty. I'm really fond of these cheesy like sci-fi pulp taglines. Hmm. Let's see here. He was a man easily smiled at, a little bird-like individual carrying an umbrella and wearing upon his pink face a look remindful of happy secrets about to be revealed. He came to my desk during the mid-afternoon lull and said, "I am Professor Jonathan Waits. I've come to avail myself of your facilities." I had never heard it quite put that way before, but from Professor Waits it did not sound stilted. It was the way you would expect him to put it. He beamed at the ceiling and said, "What a fine old library, my dear. I must bring Nicholas sometime." I gave him the smile reserved for financial supporters and unknown quantitatives, and asked, "Could I be of service?" He didn't get to immediate. He didn't get to it immediately. "I understand this library is fairly crammed with old records, data, and on the historical aspects of this area, personal histories and such." He had a way of radiating his own cheerful mood. "Oh yes," I assured him. "It's an exceptional day when we don't sweep a DAR or two out of the aisles come closing times." This, according to his laugh, was quite good. He said, "I'm sure we'll get on splendidly, Miss Hopstead. Are you a native?" A New Englander from way back," I assured him. "Some of my ancestors used to drink buttered rum with Captain Rogers." Mm, then possibly you'd like to know about my work. I certainly would, and strangely enough, I did. I am a researcher into the unusual. "Psychic research?" I inquired, wanting him to know we New Englanders were not dullards. "No, nothing to do with the supernatural at all. My work is to prove that all occurrences, however mysterious, are the logical result of previous actions of individuals. That superstitions are the result, not so much of ignorance, but lack of knowledge." While I wrestled with that one, he said, "Maybe I could be a trifle more explicit. That would help." I don't really have a I don't have a New England accent that isn't like very silly, so I think I will refrain from characterizing these characters like that. His bright little eyes got even brighter. "Do you know by chance of the Reamer Mansion over in Carlton?" I certainly did. It was some 30 miles from Patterson, but as a child I'd visited the place. All children within the radius have visited the Reamer Mansion at least once. It was an ancient 15-room cockroach trap with such a history of death and violence behind it as to cause the kids to walk on tiptoe through its silent rooms. I told the professor I knew about it. "It has been vacant for 15 years, he observed. "And it will be vacant for twice 15 more, I imagine." "That's just the point. Superstition. Otherwise solid and sane people wouldn't dream of moving into the Reamer Mansion. And it's so silly." "It is?" "Of course. And that's why I'm here. I intend to prove, so the most stubborn will understand, that the house itself has nothing whatsoever to do with its own grim past. That the people who lived the people who lived in it are to blame." It was a dull day, and he was such an apparently sincere little man that I decided to keep the conversation alive. "I'm afraid you'll have a hard time proving it. Let's see, the first one was old Silius Reamer. He committed suicide there. That was sometime around 1925. Then, his son, Henry Reamer, was found dead under mysterious circumstances 2 years later. Murder was obvious, but nothing had ever been done about it." I frowned in mock severity. "I don't like the way you put it, Professor. Do you imply that we New Englanders condone violence?" "Oh, no, not at all. There are just no clues from what I've heard." It's the Wallpaper House. Yeah, sure, why not? where The next unfortunate, a renter named Miles McCormick, was found dead along with his wife and child as a result of lethal gas from a faulty stove. That happened the year before I was born. We have the old newspapers here telling about it. "Those reports, along with other material, are what I wish to study," Professor Waite said. and then went on. The house stood vacant for 5 years until a Jonathan Hayes bought it. But Jonathan Hayes never moved in. He died of a heart attack while carrying a chair through the front door. Fuck, what a way to go. I mean, I think I'd be okay if somebody died just bringing their furniture into the house. Yeah, it's probably cursed or something. He beamed on me. You are a remarkably alert young woman, well up in local history. With no credit to me, you'd be hard put finding a citizen around here who doesn't know the history of the Reamer Mansion. Not of the Reamer Mansion, my dear, of the people who just happened to reap their ill fortune there. You insist the house had nothing to do with it. Nothing whatsoever. Professor, I wonder if you know how big a bite you've taken. If you go up in the hills hereabouts, you'll find whole families living in dirt floor houses. You'll find children who never heard of bath or a telephone, but you won't find one person who would live in the Reamer Mansion for a salary paid promptly every Saturday morning. Nonetheless, Professor Waits replied, the so-called jinx of the mansion, or any other maligned locality, is a matter of monstrous coincidence. The truth lies hidden in the lives of the people involved. I've been ferreting out that truth. You mean this isn't the beginning, Professor? He grasped his umbrella in a manner indicating he meant to spear a dragon in case there were any around, and said, Oh no, I've been tracing the lives of the Oh my, no. I've been tracing the lives of the principals in this drama for some time. It involves long, tedious work. I must not only dig into the lives of the unfortunate themselves, but also into those of kin, even, in some cases, friends. Well, what did you find out about the murder? He evaded neatly. I am not seeking a killer as such. Relative to that facet of the case, I am more interested in Henry Reamer himself. A very wise man once said, if you would understand violence, look also into the heart of the murdered. A man carries the seeds of his destiny in his own soul. And you intend to prove it? I am finding more proof every day. Soon I shall publish a paper which will startle the thinking world. I could see the professor wasn't one to be backed into any corners. And how can I help you in this work? I am tracing at the moment certain details in the life of Mabel Tutbury, an aunt of Silius Reamer. Unauthenticated legends indicated she killed an 8-pound buck once with her bare hands and dragged it home across 10 miles of forest. Wow, that lady's tough. Did I say 8-pound? 8-point. An 8-pound buck would be very small. I've heard that, and it's probably true. You think it has something to do with what happened to Silius and his son Henry. I think you'll find what you want in that section over by the south window. It's devoted to local history. Thank you, my dear. He moved away, reminding me somehow of a happy retriever going into the lake after a duck. Halfway to the shelves, he halted suddenly and turned. Did you know that 70% of the accidents happen to 20% of the people? I didn't, but I refuse to admit such backwardness. I certainly do. Amazing, isn't it? That is one of the pillars upon which my work is based. And there are others? 7 in all. He didn't tell me what the other 6 were. Instead, he disappeared into local history and left me with the latest bestseller I was reading under the counter, lest some child come in and be stripped of all innocence in one glance. It was 2 hours before Professor Waits reappeared. He carried a small blue notebook in one hand and a stub pencil in the other. He was positively beaming. A gold mine, he said. A veritable gold mine. Did you know that Ezekiel Webb, a cousin of William Tutworthy, was gored by a bull in the year of 1862? No. Really? No, she's not reading porn. She's reading some sort of like best-selling pulp fiction, which is, you have to remember, for like the early 1900s, like something salacious isn't necessarily sexual. It's just like it's it would be considered fairly innocuous today. I understand that thought. Then I was truly ashamed of myself. He was such a pleasant, sincere little man, and he got such fun out of life. But he misinterpreted my boorishness for true enthusiasm and said, "It's a fact. Imagine walking in." Oh no, I read that wrong. That line wrong. Then no, really. Then I was truly ashamed of myself. He was such a pleasant, sincere little man, and he got such fun out of life. But he misinterpreted my boorishness for true enthusiasm and said, "It's a fact. Imagine walking in here and finding one of the links I've hunted for months. I am indebted to you, my dear, for directing me to that bookshelf." I could have told him he was under no obligation, that I got, each week, the coolie stipend of $28 for doing just that, but I didn't want him starting an investigation into peonage systems practiced in libraries and schools. Then something in the little man's manner sobered me. "Professor, exactly why are you doing this?" He blinked. "I have plenty of money, I have the time, it interests me, and I feel it a worthy occupation, gathering knowledge through which people might know the true causes of misfortune, may throw off the yoke of superstition." "You feel, then, that nothing happens by chance?" "My dear," he said solemnly, "in this ordered universe there can be no such thing. Action and achievement, cause and result. The revealing pattern of each man's actions is in the past of himself and his antecedents." "And by proving this, you will exonerate the Reamer Mansion of all guilt?" He smiled. "You are a most intelligent young lady, most intelligent. I shall see a great deal of you in the weeks to come." It was not a distasteful prospect. I liked the professor and was glad he liked me. After he left, I went back and found not a single book out of place. I liked him even more. 2 weeks passed before I saw Professor Waits again. He came in out of the sunshine, carrying his black umbrella and wearing the same black string necktie. I was busy at the time finding an acceptable book for Mrs. Winslow's little Freddie, who was in bed with the pip. When I got clear, Professor Waits was deep in his research, and I did not disturb him. He came pattering out just before the closing time, and I was struck by the somber, almost sad expression he wore. "Did you have trouble finding what you wanted, Professor?" "Oh, no, the records were most voluminous. It's just, well, the nature of my discoveries." "Bad?" "Very bad, Miss Hopstead. Do you know who Henry Rima's murderer was?" "No." "Miles McCormick, the renter who died there so tragically with his family." I didn't know how to respond, whether I should faint or scream for the police. I settled for a philosophical comment. "A case of justice by a higher power?" "Do you mean McCormick's death?" "Of course." "On the contrary, there was no connection at all between the two events. McCormick and his wife and child died because they violated a certain law, but not necessarily a law on the statute books." "I am afraid I don't quite follow that." "Look at it this way, Miss Hopstead. You are walking through a dark room. A door is standing open. You come into violent contact with the edge of it. What happens? A broken nose? A black eye?" "Precisely. The fact that you didn't know the door was there didn't protect you from the consequences." This, of course, I was forced to concede. "Now, let's go a step further by taking, as example, a lower mentality than our own. A horse, knowing nothing of the laws of electricity, would step on a high-voltage wire and never know why it was electrocuted. In such a case, an animal would violate a law it did not know existed." I was beginning to see what he was driving at. "You mean we are far above the horse in mentality and understanding, but there are still many laws we do not understand, and that is what my work involves." I insisted on being heard. "You mean a lot of apparently innocent things we do really are... we do Excuse me, I insisted upon being heard. You mean a lot of apparently innocent things we do are really electric wires? He beamed. Exactly. When we reap misfortune, it is because we violate some law. Ignorance of that law doesn't change the end result one iota. And you're trying to find out what these booby traps are? Oh, I know many of them already. My paper will surprise the world. I'm working on a more advanced phase of the problem now. I am tracing a pattern of interlocking violations to show that the scene of the end results can only be sheerest coincidence. I wish to banish once and for all the superstitious stigma attached to the scenes of repeated misfortune and violence. The Reamer Mansion. That's right. And now I must be going, Miss Hopstead. He gave me the departing smile and started for the door. Professor Waits. Yes? About Mabel Tutworthy. Did she really drag that buck 10 miles? Oh no, it was only a fawn, and she killed it less than a mile from her cabin. And the murder of Henry Reamer. What proof? Nothing the police would be interested in. It was the end result of a cause they won't understand until my work is published and given study. He opened the door, looked around, and smiled. This is certainly a fine old building. I must bring Nicholas with me next time. And with that, he was gone. I found myself looking forward to his next visit. I looked and looked, and a month passed, and a tall, serious-faced youth came to the library and waited until I finished checking in Mr. Garvey's returns. I understand, he said, that you have an immense store of local history in this library. The section by the south window. Thank you. He peered at me through the thick lenses. Thank you, Miss Hopstead. Miss Hopstead. I am Nicholas Worthy. Perhaps you knew of a friend of mine, Professor Waits. I am carrying on his work. Carrying on? Did something happen to? Oh, then you didn't hear. It was most tragic. Professor Waits died of pneumonia. A great loss. Great loss. I was deeply shocked. My feeling was that of losing a close friend. No, I hadn't heard. It must have been very sudden. It was. He was advanced in years, you know. And after he fell, pneumonia set in quickly, and they were unable to save him. The professor had an accident? Yes, he fell down the main staircase of the Reamer Mansion and broke his hip. I'm gonna be honest, I like that one a lot more before the ending. It's hunted. Oh yeah, Crucy, that's the end. Yeah. Yeah, that one has such an anticlimactic ending. It was like an interesting little story, but I feel like the author had no idea where to take it, and so it just stopped. I mean, or maybe it was just supposed to be a joke. Maybe it was just supposed to be this guy, he's full of it. I don't know. All right, so I have three things set out here, and I'd like to hear y'all's opinions on what we should read. The three things I have here are The House on the Borderland, which is a story about two people. My understanding is they come to some old house in the Irish countryside, and it ends up sliding into some other world, reality. Um, if you look at chapter 6, the swine things, the only other thing I know about it is that there are pig people. I figured you would, Tony. I'm gonna give all the options here, and I'm gonna get the gauge of what everyone else thinks. Um, in addition, we have Creatures of the Abyss by Murray Linnister, which I am going to be honest. I skimmed through and picked primarily based on the ending, which I will not spoil. But it is about monsters underneath the ocean and people in like a submarine going and investigating. I also really like the cover art. And third up here would be Historic Ghosts and Ghost Hunters by H. Addington Bruce. This is a what do you call it? Like a anthology. It's a series of several. We have a chapter list here. Yeah, the very classic horror stories titled the Devils of Loudon, the Drummer of Tedworth, the Cocklane Ghost. So we had Tony vote for the first one. What does everyone else in chat think? We can always come back to any of these. Yeah. I thought y'all liked that. The Cocklane Ghost. Okay, so that's one vote for the House in the Borderland, and one for uh, Historic Ghosts and Ghost Hunters. What about you, Mooney? Do you have an opinion? I'm not sure who else is in chat. You three are the only ones who are talking. Change your mind for the cock ghost? God damn it. Well, what we could do is we could read House in the Borderline and sort of come back and forth through like these anthology stories. Like, say, we'll read House in the Borderline for. So we've been going for an hour and a half now. Maybe for another hour and a half, and then we'll read. We'll start on the comeback. I should have known better. As soon as you guys see the word cock, you just go crazy. Y'all know it's gonna be like a rooster, right? It's not even gonna be a rooster. It's Cock Lane. It's just a road. It's just a ghost on a road, y'all. Calm down. Jesus. I don't care. Give me the cock. Cock ghost. God damn it. I'm gonna take a quick bathroom break while you guys get that out of your system. And y'all want to just want to read chapter 5? Do you guys want to just skip to the Cockling Ghost? We can do that. There's no rules. Okay, I am back. Tony, I believe all of these stories in Ghosts and Ghost Hunters are unrelated. So there is no build up to the cock ghost. It's just you get to the cock ghost when you get there. Can I just like life. Okay, we will read The Cockling Ghost. I feel like I should have music for this one. Put penis music on the background. Okay. Chapter 5, The Cockling Ghost. I'm gonna be unable to get through this without fucking busting out laughing. The quaint old London church of St. Sepulchre's could not by any stretch of the imagination be called a fashionable place of worship. It stood in a crowded quarter of the city, and the gentry were content to leave it to the small tradesfolk and humble working people who made up its parish. Now and again a stray antiquarian paid it a fleeting visit, but speaking generally, the coming of a stranger was so rare as to be accounted an event. It is easy, then, to understand the sensation occasioned by the appearance at prayers one morning in the year of grace 1759 of a young and well-dressed couple whose natural habitat was so obviously in quite other surroundings. As they waited in the aisle, the man tall and erect and easy of bearing, the woman fair and graceful, there was an instant craning of necks and vast nudging of one's neighbors, and long after they had seated themselves, a subdued whispering bore further, if unnecessary, testimony to the curiosity they had aroused. I'm I'm so upset. Probably no one felt a more lively interest than did the parish clerk, who, in showing them to a pew, had noted the tenderness with which they regarded each other. It needed nothing more to persuade him that they were eloping lovers, and that a snug gratuity was as good as in his pocket. As all throughout through the service, he fidgeted impatiently in the shadows near the door, and as soon as the congregation was dismissed and he perceived that the visitors were lingering in their places, he hurried forward and accosted them. His name, he volubly explained, was Parsons, and he was an officiating clerk of the parish, likewise master in the charity school nearby. No doubt they would like to inspect the church, perhaps to visit the school. It might even be they were desirous of meeting the pastor. He would be delighted if he could serve them in any way. Possibly you can, said the man, for doubtless you know the neighborhood like a book. My name is Knight, and this lady is my wife. He stopped short at sight of the changed expression on the other's face, and brusquely demanded, How now, man? What are you gaping at? No offense, sir, no offense, stammered the disappointed and embarrassed clerk. I beg your pardon, sir and madam. There was an awkward pause before the man began again. As I was saying, my name is Knight, and this lady is my wife. We have only recently come to London. I'm not doing a British accent, I'm sorry, I would murder it. And we are in search of lodgings. If you know of any good place which we could recommend us, we'd heartily oblige you. Whatever he was, Clerk Parsons was not a fool, and these few words showed him plainly that he was face to face with a mystery. Elopers or no, such a well-born couple. Maybe when I'm a little bit more comfortable, Tony. Maybe I can do accents. Still a little anxious about doing this whole thing. Elopers or no, such a well-born couple could not from choice bury themselves in this forbidding section of London. With the cunning fostered by long years of precarious livelihood, he at once resolved to profit, if he could, from their need. I fear, sir, said he, I know of no lodgings that would be at all suitable for you. We are poor folk, all of us, and if you are honest folk, interrupted the lady with an enchanting smile, we ask no more. Her husband checked her with a gesture and a look that was not lost on the now all-observing clerk, though it was long before he understood its significance. We are willing to pay a reasonable charge and shall require only a bedroom and a sitting room. If possible, we would prefer to be where there are no other lodgers. In that case, responded the clerk with an eagerness he could scarcely veil, I can accommodate you in my own house. It is simple but commodious, and I can answer that my wife will do fairly with you. What think you, Fanny? Asked the man, turning to his wife. We can at least go and see. This they immediately did, and to Clerk Parsons' joy, decided to make their home with him. Nor did their coming gladden the clerk alone. His wife and children, 2 little girls of 9 and 10, from the moment they saw the beautiful lady, conceived a warm attachment for her. Her geniality, her kindliness, her manifest love for her husband appealed to their sympathies, as did the sadness which from time to time clouded her face. If, like Parsons himself, they soon became convinced that she and her husband shared some monumentous secret, they could not bring themselves to believe it involved in her wrongdoing. For the husband, they too entertained the friendliest feelings. He was of a blunt, outspoken disposition, perhaps a trifle quick-tempered, but he was frank and liberal and sincerely devoted to his wife. For all in the household, therefore, the days passed pleasantly. And when Miss Parsons one fine spring morning discovered her fair guest in tears, she felt that time had established between them relations sufficiently confidential to warrant her motherly intervention. Come, my dear, she said, I have long seen that something is troubling you. Tell me what it is, that I might comfort you, perhaps aid you. Yes, Mooney, we're in Cock Lane. It is nothing, good Miss Parsons, nothing. I am very foolish. I was thinking of what become of me if anything should happen to my husband. Dear, dear, and nothing will. But you could then turn to your relatives. I have no relatives. What, my dear, are they all dead? No, in a solemn tone, but I am dead to them. In a voice shaken by sobs, she now unfolded her story, and pitiful enough it was. She was, it appeared, the sister of Knight's first wife, who had died in Norfolk, leaving her newborn child that survived its mother only a few hours. At Knight's request, she then went to keep house for him, and presently they found themselves very much in love with each other. But in the canon law, they discovered an insurmountable obstacle to marriage. Had the wife died without issue, or had her child not been born alive, the law would have permitted her, even though a deceased wife's sister, to wed the man of her choice. As things stood, a legitimate union was out of the question. Learning this, they resolved to separate, but separation brought only increased longing. Thence grew up rapid and mutual persuasion that, under the circumstances, it would be no sin to bid defiance to the canon law and live together as man and wife. This view not finding favor with their relatives and becoming apprehensive of arrest and imprisonment, they had fled to London and had hidden themselves in its depths. Surely, she concluded with a desperate intensity, surely fair-minded people would not condemn them. Surely all who knew what true love was would feel they could not have acted otherwise. This confession, though it did not in the least diminish her landlady's regard for her, worked indirectly in a most disastrous way. Excuse me. Whether driven by necessity or emboldened by the belief that his lodgers were at his mercy, the clerk soon afterward approached Knight for a small loan, and, obtaining it, repeated the request on several other occasions until he had borrowed in all about £12. Payment he postponed on one pretext or another, until the lender finally lost all patience and informed him roundly that he must settle or stand suit. Then, following an interchange of words and an instant terminated by the pleasant connection of the preceding months, something about the formatting of this. Then, following an interchange of words that in an instant terminated the pleasant connection of the preceding months, Parson was described as an impudent scoundrel who would be taught what honesty meant. Parson described himself as knowing what honesty meant full well and needing no lessons from a fugitive from justice. White with rage, Knight bundled his belongings together, called a hackney coach, and within an hour had shaken the dust of Cock Lane from his feet, finding new lodgings in Clerkenwell, and at once hailing his Willem, I don't know what that word means, landlord into debtor's court. A little time and all else was forgotten in the sudden illness of his beloved Fanny. At first, the physician declared that the malady would prove slight, but she herself seemed to feel she was doomed. "Send for a lawyer," she urged. "I want to make my will. It is little enough I have, God knows, but I wish to be sure you will get it all, dear husband." To humor her, the will was drawn, and now it developed that the disease which had attacked her was smallpox in its worst form. No need to dwell on the fearful hours that followed, the gone farewells, the lapsing into merciful unconsciousness, the death. They buried her in the vaults of St. John's, Clerkenwell, and from her tomb her husband came forth to give battle to the relatives who, shunning her while alive, did not disdain to seek possession of the small legacy she had left behind him. In this they failed, but scarcely had the smoke of the legal cannonading cleared away before he was called to meet a new issue so unexpected and so mysterious that history affords no stranger sequel to Tale of Love. The first intimation, right. The first intimation of its coming and of its nature was revealed to him as to the public generally by a brief paragraph printed in mid-January 1762 issue of the London Ledger. For some time past, a great knocking having been heard in the night at the officiating parish clerk's of St. Sepulchre's in Cock Lane near Smithfield, to the great terror of the family and all means used to discover the meaning of it. 4 gentlemen set up there last night, among who was a clergyman standing within inside the door, who asked various questions. On his asking whether anyone might have been murdered, no answer was made. But on his asking on whether anyone might have been poisoned, it knocked 31 times. The report current in the neighborhood is that a woman was some time ago poisoned and buried in St. John's, Clerkenwell, by her brother-in-law. Oh, shit. Instantly, the city was agog, and for the next fortnight the Ledger, the Chronicle, and other newspapers gave much of their space to the details of the pretended revelations, though they were careful to refer to names by blanks or initials only. These accounts were informed their readers that the knocking had first been heard in the lifetime of the deceased, when, during the absence of her supposed husband, she had shared her bed with Clerk Parsons' oldest daughter. That she had then pronounced it as an omen of her early death, that it did not occur again until after she had died, that, if the soi distant spirit could be believed, the earlier knocking had been due to the agency of her dead sister, and that, in her own turn, had been come back to bring justice to the villains who had murdered her for the little she possessed. In commenting on this amazing story, the papers were prompt to point out that the knocking was heard only in the presence of the aforementioned daughter, now a girl of 12, and while one or two, like the Ledger, inclined to credence, the majority followed the Chronicle in denouncing the affair as an imposture. The outraged husband, as may be imagined, lost not a moment in demanding admissions to the seances, which were proceeding merrily under the direction of a servant of the Parsons family and a clergyman in the neighborhood. He found that the method practiced was to put the girl to bed, wait until the knocking should begin, and then question the alleged spirit, when the answers were received according to a code of 1 knock for an affirmative and 2 knocks for a negative. It was in his presence, then, that not a single sitting... That the following... It was in his presence, then, though not at a single sitting, that the following dialogue was in this way carried out. Are you Miss Fanny? Yes. Did you die naturally? No. Did you die by poison? Yes. Do you know what kind of poison it was? Yes. Was it arsenic? Yes. Was it given to you by any person other than Mr. Knight? No. Do you wish that he was hanged? Yes. Was it given to you in gruel? No. In beer? Yes. Here a spectator interrupted with the remark that the deceased was never known to drink beer, but had been fond of purel, and the question was hatefully put, was it not impurel? Yes. How long did you live after taking it? 3 knocks, held to men 3 hours. Did Carrots, her maid, know of your being poisoned? Yes. Did you tell her? Yes. How long was it after you took it before you told her? 1 knock for 1 hour. Here was something tangible, and Knight went to work with a will to refute the terrible charge brought by his invisible accuser. As reported in the Daily Gazetteer, which had promised that the reader may expect to be enlightened from time to time from the utmost of our power in this intricate and dark affair, the maid Carrots was found, and from her was procured a sworn statement that Miss Knight had said not a word to her about being poisoned, that indeed she had become unconscious 12 hours before her death and remained unconscious to the end. The physician and apothecary who had attended her made affidavit to the same effect, described by the fatal nature of her illness. It was further shown that her death had at most benefited Knight by not more than £100, of which he had no need, for he was of independent means. Altogether, he would seem to have cleared himself effectually. Still, the knocking continued, and night after night the accusation was repeated. He now resorted, therefore, to a radical step to convince the public that he was the victim of a monstrous fraud. Asserting that little Miss Parsons herself produced the mysterious sounds, that she did so at instigation of her father, he secured an order for her removal from the house of a friend to the house of a friend of his, a Clerkenwell clergyman. Here a decisive failure was recorded against the ghost. It had promised that it would knock on the coffin containing Mrs. Knight's remains, and about 1 o'clock in the morning, after hours of silent watching, during which the spirit gave not a sign of its presence, the entire company adjourned to the church. Only one member was found of sufficient boldness to plunge with Knight into the gloomy depths where the dead lay entombed, and that one bore out his statement that never a knock had been heard. The girl was urged to confess, but persisted in her assertions that the ghost was in no wise of her making. Afterwards, when knocking had been resumed under more favorable auspices, word came about from the unseen world that the fiasco in the church was ascribable to a very good reason that Knight had caused his wife's coffin to be secretly removed. "I will show them," cried the desperate man. With clergyman, sexton, and undertaker, he visited the vaults once more, and not only identified, but opened the coffin. Meanwhile, all of London was flocking to Cock Lane as to a rarity show. I can't read that name. On foot, on horseback, in vehicles of every description. Some, like the celebrated Dr. Johnson, who took part in the coffin opening episode in Clerkenwell, were animated by scientific zeal, but idle curiosity inspired the great majority. The gossiping Walpole, in the letter to his friend Montague, has left a graphic picture of the stir created by the newspaper reports. "I went to hear it," he writes, "for it is not an apparition but an audition. We set out from the opera. changed our clothes at Northumberland, Norther, Northumberland House. The Duke of York, Lady Northumberland, Lady Mary Coke, Lord Hertford, and I, all in one hackney coach, and drove to the spot. It rained in torrents, yet the lane was full of mob, and the house was so full we could not get in. At last they discovered it was the Duke of York, and the company squeezed themselves into one another's pockets to make room for us. The house, which is borrowed, and to which the ghost is adjourned, is wretchedly small and miserable. When we opened the chamber, in which we were 50 people with no light but one tallow candle at the end, we tumbled over the bed of the child with whom the ghost comes, and whom they are murdering by inches with such insufferable heat and stench. At the top of the room are clothes to dry. I asked if we were to have rope dancing between the acts. We heard nothing. They told us, as they would at a puppet show, that it would not come that night till 7 in the morning. That is, when there were only princesses and old women. We stayed, however, till half an hour after 1. The skepticism patent in this letter was shared by all thinking men. Letter after letter of criticism, even of abuse, was poured onto the newspapers. No less a personage than Oliver Goldsmith wrote, under the title of The Mystery Revealed, a long pamphlet which was intended both to explain away the disturbances and to defend the luckless knight. The actor Garrick dragged into a prologue a rimming and sneering reference to the mystery. The artist Hogarth invoked his genius to deride it. Yet there were believers in plenty, and there were even seemed to have been some who thought, how much longer is this one? What are you guys thinking about this one? Because I'm feeling like it's very dry. I guess it's almost over. Yeah. Yeah, I feel like it's extremely dry. Oh my god, Rose. Lucy. God damn it. Fucking, well, we're near the end of it, so I think I will finish it at least. Oh, where was my place? On Tuesday last, one reads in the Chronicle, it was given out that a new knocking ghost was to perform that evening in a house in Broad Court near Bow Street, Covent Garden. Information of which being given to a certain magistrate in the neighborhood, he sent his compliments with an intimation that it should not meet with that with that leniency the Cock Lane ghost did, but it should knock hemp into Bridewell. I guess that's a turn of phrase. On which the ghost very discreetly omitted the attended exhibition. Whether or no he took a hint from this publication, it is certain that, finding all other means failing, Knight now resolved to try to lay by legal process the ghosts that had rendered him the most unhappy and most talked of man in London. Going before a magistrate, he brought a charge of criminal conspiracy against Clerk Parsons, Mrs. Parsons, the Parsons' servant, the clergyman who had aided in the servant in eliciting the murder story from the talkative ghost, and a Cock Lane tradesman. All of these, he alleged, had banded themselves together to ruin him, their malice arising from the quarrel which had led him to remove to Clerkenwell and enter a lawsuit against Parsons. The girl himself did not desire punished, because she was too young to understand the evil which she wrought. Warrants were forthwith issued, and protesting their innocence frantically, the accused were dragged to prison. Yeah, okay, yeah, I'll agree, Mooney. That line is very omitted. Yes, declined to arrive. Their conviction soon followed, after a trial of which The only obtainable evidence is that it was held at the Guildhall before a special jury which was provided over by Lord Mansfield. Then, the court desiring that Mr. K, who had been so much injured on this occasion, would receive some reparation, sentence was deferred for several months. This enabled the clergyman and the tradesmen to purchase their pardon by the payment of some 500 or 600 pounds to the knight. But the clerk either would not or could not pay a farthing, and on him and his sentence was now passed. The father, to quote once more from the meager account in the Annual Register, was ordered to be set in the pillory 3 times in 1 month, once at the end of Cock Lane, and after that to be imprisoned 2 years, Elizabeth, his wife, 1 year, and Mary Fraser 6 months to Bridewell, and to be kept there to hard labor. Thus, in wig and gown, did the law solemnly and severely place the seal of disbelief on the Cock Lane ghost, which, it is worth observing, did seem to have vanished forever the moment the arrests were made. Okay, I'm glad we continued reading. But looking back at the case from the vantage point of chronological distance and of recent research into kindred affairs, it is difficult to accept as final the verdict reached by the special jury and concurred in by public opinion of the day. It is preposterous to suppose that, for so slight a cause as a dispute over £12, Clerk Parsons and his associates would conspire to ruin a man's reputation and, if possible, to take his life. And still more preposterous to imagine that they would adopt such a means to attain this end. Of course, they may have had stronger reasons for being hostile to Knight than it appears from the published facts, yet it is significant that when the clerk was passed in the pillory, he seemed to be out of his mind, and so evident was his misery that the assembled mob, instead of using him ill, made a handsome collection for him. The more likely, nay, the only defensible solution to the problem is that he, his fellow sufferers, and Knight himself were one and all the victims of the uncontrollable impulses of a hysterical child. The case bears too strong a resemblance of the Tedworth and Epworth. Oh, I think I recognize those names. If those are the ones I'm thinking about, they were American ghost hoax children. Not that the Parsons girl is to be placed on exactly the same footing as the... Oh, maybe it's the Moffison children that I'm thinking of, and held in some extent responsible for the mischievous phenomena she produced. On the contrary, the more one studies the evidence, the stronger grows the conviction that in her we have a striking and singular instance of dissociation. She was, it is very evident, strongly attached to the unfortunate Miss Knight, and doubtless felt keenly the separation from her, and whether consciously or subconsciously would cherish a grudge against Knight as the cause of that separation. The news of Mrs. Knight's death would come as a great shock, and might easily act, so to speak, as the fulcrum of the lever of mental disintegration. Then, dimly enough at first, but soon with portentous rapidity, her disordered consciousness would conceive the idea that her friend had been murdered, and that it was her duty to bring the slayer to justice. From this, it would be an easy step to the development in the neurotic child of a full-fledged secondary personality akin to that found in spiritualistic mediums of later times. Now, for the first time, her faculties would seem to her astonished parents to be in the keeping and under the control of an extraneous being, a departed and discarnate spirit, and in this error she and they would be confirmed by suggestions and foolish questions of those who came to marvel. It needed another great shock, there being in those days no Janet or Prince or Citus to take charge of the case, the shock of the arrest and imprisonment of her parents, to effect at least partial reintegration, and the consequent disappearance of the secondary self, the much-debated, malevolent Cock Lane ghost. I think the author is supposing a lot. There's a lot of possible things here. Very, very unlikely to be supernatural. The much-debated, malevolent Cock Lane ghost. Okay, I was mistaken. I did at first think that these were supposed to be real world examples, but yeah, I know, right? Um, and then I thought that they might be short stories, but no, they do seem to be accounts of actual ghosty happenings. Well, maybe we'll return to this at some point. I'm gonna go grab some water, and then well, I guess do we guys want the what is it, the Creatures of the Abyss or House on the Borderland? Mooney, you got up, didn't you? So you didn't see the you weren't here when we were trying to make a choice. Yes, it seems that that actually happened. That all of those things actually occurred in London in 17. What was it 62? Well, I'd love to hear your opinion on the two House on the Borderlands. Okay. Well, I'm gonna be right back, and we'll start on House of the Borderlands. We'll see if we can't get through a couple of chapters of that. All right. So, how the House on the Borderland by William Hope Hodgson. Hodgson? From the manuscript discovered in 1877 by Messrs. Tonneson Brenagog in the ruins that lie to the south of the village in Crichton in the west of Ireland, set out here with notes. So I'm guessing, this made me think of, and I know this is a probably just a common touchstone. This related to what's contemporary to me personally. It sort of makes me think of House of Leaves. I think that this might be being presented as a fictional historical document. Yeah, this is not something we're going to finish tonight. There are 27 chapters. Chapter's got some good titles though, like The Swine Things or the Subterranean Pit. Oh, The Dark Nebula. I like that one. Well, now you get the chance. You got company for it, Tony. Pepper. I don't know what's pepper. I know you do. I know you do, Crazy. Okay, well, let's see how many of these chapters we can cut through here. Oh, I read this. This is a very funny word to me, and I maybe Tony might already know this because this is probably like a local colloquialism. But before I read this, shoon are like, I don't think specifically shoes. I think any kind of foot covering. It's just a way of saying shoes. To my father, whose feet tread the lost aeons, open the door and listen. Only the wind's muffled roar and the glisten of tears round the moon, and in fancy the tread of vanishing soon out in the night with the dead. Hush and hark to the sorrowful cry of the wind in the dark. Hush and hark without murmur or sigh to shoon that tread the lost eons, to the sound that bids you to die. Hush and hark, hush and hark, shoon of the dead. Yeah, this book is very old, so I just didn't know if it was something that you might be. Let's see here. Author's introduction to the manuscript. Many are the hours in which I have pondered upon the story that is set forth in the following pages. I trust that my instincts are not awry when they prompt me to leave the account in simplicity as it was handed to me. And the MS itself, you must picture me when it first was given into my care turning it over curiously and making a swift, jerky examination. A small book it is, but thick, and all, save the last few pages, filled with a quaint but legible handwriting, and writ very close. I have the queer, faint pit water smelling of it in my nostrils now as I write, and my fingers have subconscious memories of the soft, cloggy feel of the long, damp pages. I read, and in reading, lifted the curtains of the impossible that blind the mind, and looked out into the unknown. Amid stiff, abrupt sentences I wandered, and presently I had no fault to charge against their abrupt tellings, for better far than my for better far than my own ambitious phrasing is this mutilated story capable of bringing home all that the old recluse of the vanishing house had striven to tell. Of the simple, stiffly given account of weird and extraordinary matters, I will say little. It lies before you. The inner story must be uncovered, personally, by each reader, according to ability and desire. And even should any fail to see, as I now see, the shadowed picture and conception of that which one may well give the accepted titles of heaven and hell, yet I can promise certain thrills, merely taking the story as a story. William Hope Hodgson, December 17th, 1907. Yeah, I mean, it's old, not old, but early modern, not even early, I guess. It's like, I'm not sure what you would call this. Early 20th century English. They like the word queer, and I like the word queer, so we're on the same page there. Chapter 1. How is the font size here, actually? I've been sort of going back and forth. I forgot to ask at the start of this stream. I wanted to make sure it was like big enough to be legible if you didn't necessarily have it full screen, but I don't know if it's too big. It's readable. Could be a bit bigger. Okay. Well, we can bump that up. Yeah. Is that too big? I can't go. I'm not sure if I can go smaller than an extra 25% there. Seems not. Yeah, so is 150, is that too big or is that good? I have no. I'm like looking at it on a big screen, so I have really no concept of how it might look otherwise. Okay, well. Chapter 1, The Finding of the Manuscript. Right away in the west of Ireland lies a tiny hamlet called Creighton. It is situated alone in the base of a low hill. Far around there spreads a waste of bleak and totally inhospitable country, where, here and there, at great intervals, one may come across the ruins of some long desolate cottage, unthatched and stark. The whole land is bare and unpeopled, the very earth scarcely covering the rock that lies beneath it, and with which the country abounds, in places rising out of the soil in wave-shaped ridges. Yet, in spite of its desolation, my friend Tonneson and I had elected to spend our vacation there. He had stumbled into the place by mere chance the year previously, during the course of a long walking tour, and discovered the possibilities for the angler in a small and unnamed river that runs past the outskirts of the little village. I have said that the river is without name. I may add that no map I have hitherto consulted has shown either village or stream. They seem to have entirely escaped observation. Indeed, they might never exist for all. They might never exist for all that quiet guide tells no one. Is that the other that strange wording? Possibly this can be partly accounted for by the fact that the nearest railway station, Aderan, you have to forgive me, Tony, if I'm butchering some of these place names, is some 40 miles distant. Ardrahan, probably. Yep, that's Callaway. Inhospitable and rocky, baby. It was early one warm evening when my friend and I arrived in Creighton. We had reached Ardaran. I'm going to stumble over that a lot. The previous night, sleeping there in rooms hired at the village post office, and leaving in good time to the following morning, clinging insecurely to one of the typical jaunting carts. It had taken us all day to accomplish our journey over some of the roughest tracks imaginable, with the result that we were thoroughly tired and somewhat bad tempered. However, the tent had to be erected and our goods stored away before we could think of food or rest, and so we set to work with the aid of our driver and soon had the tent up on a small patch of ground just outside the little village and quite near to the river. Then, having stored all of our belongings, we dismissed the driver, as he had to make his way back as speedily as possible, and told him to come across to us at the end of a fortnight. We had brought sufficient provisions to last us for that space of time, and water we could get from the stream. Fuel we did not need, as we had included a small oil stove among our outfit, and the weather was fine and warm. It was Tonnisson's idea to camp out instead of getting lodgings in one of the cottages. As he put it, there was no joke in sleeping in a room with a numerous family of healthy Irish in one corner and the pigsty in the other, while overhead a ragged colony of roosting fowls distributed their blessings impartially, and the whole place so full of peat smoke that it made a fellow sneeze his head off just to put his inside the doorway. Tonnisson had got the stove lit now and was busy cutting slices of bacon into the frying pan, so I took the kettle and walked along the river for water. On the way, I had to pass close to a little group of the village people, who eyed me curiously, but not in any unfriendly manner, though none of them ventured a word. I mean, I could see you want to go out and go fishing, on a fishing trip. You don't want to spend your nights crammed in a family cottage with a bunch of chickens shitting on you. Like, I can respect that. Anyway, let's see here. As I returned with my kettle filled, I went up to them, and, after a friendly nod to which they replied in like manner, I asked them casually about the fishing, but instead of answering, they just shook their heads silently and stared at me. I repeated the question, addressing more particularly a great gaunt fellow at my elbow. Yet again, I received no answer. Then the man turned to a comrade and said something rapidly in a language that I did not understand, and at once the whole crowd of them fell into jabbering in what, after a few moments, I guessed to be pure Irish. Oh no, this was written by an English person. Oh dear. And it takes place in Ireland. Well, we'll just slap that content warning on there because it's probably going to get gross. Never mind, I take back what I said about the cottage. Jabbering. I'm sure you've seen worse, but it stands to be said. Um, at the same time, they cast many glances in my direction. For a minute, perhaps, they spoke among themselves thus. Then the man I addressed faced round at me and said something. By the expression of his face, I guessed that he, in turn, was questioning me, but now I had to shake my head and indicate that I did not comprehend what it was they wanted to know. And so we stood looking at one another until I heard Tonnisson calling me to hurry up with the kettle, and then, with a smile and a nod, I left them, and all in the little crowd smiled and nodded in return, though their faces still betrayed their puzzlement. It's like, what are these English assholes doing? What are you doing? Just hanging out in the woods. It was evident, I reflected as I went toward the tent, that the inhabitants of these few huts in the wilderness did not know a word of English, and when I told Tonnisson, he remarked that he was aware of the fact, and more, that it was not at all uncommon in that part of the country, where the people often lived and died in their isolated hamlets without ever coming in contact with the outside world. I wish we had got the driver to interpret for us before he left, I remarked, as we sat down for our meal. It seems so strange for the people of this place to not even know what we've come for. Tonneson grunted in assent and thereafter was silent for a while. Later, having satisfied our appetites somewhat, we began to talk, laying our plans for the morrow, and then, after a smoke, we closed the flap of the tent and prepared to turn in. I suppose there's no chance of those fellows outside taking anything, I asked. Oh, Jesus Christ. We're already starting. As we rolled ourselves in our blankets. Tonneson said that he did not think so, at least while we were about. And that as he went to explain, we could lock up everything except the tent and a big chest we had brought to hold our provisions. I agreed to this, and soon we were both asleep. Next morning, early, we rose and went for a swim in the river, after which we dressed and had breakfast. Then we roused out our fishing tackle and overhauled it, by which time our breakfast had settled somewhat, and we made all secure within our tent and strode off in the direction my friend had explored on his previous visit. During the day we fished happily, working steadily upstream, and by evening we had one of the prettiest creels of fish that I had seen for a long while. Returning to the village, we made a good feed off our day's spoil, after which, having selected a few of our finer fish for our breakfast, we presented the remainder to the group of villagers who had assembled at a respectful distance to watch our doings. So there was just like a small crowd of people just watching them camping. Yeah, your words, not mine, Tony. I mean, they give them fish. And it's like, hey, we're just here to fish and fucking hang out. They seemed wonderfully grateful and heaped mountains of what I presumed to be Irish blessings upon our heads. Oh. I can't wait for the spooky stuff to happen. Thus we spent several days having splendid sport and first-rate appetites to do justice upon our prey. We were pleased to find how friendly the villagers were inclined to be, and that there was no evidence of their having ventured to meddle with our belongings during our absences. It was on a Tuesday that we arrived in Crichton, and it would be on the Sunday following that we made a great discovery. Hitherto, we had always gone upstream. On that day, however, we laid aside our rods and, taking some provisions, set off for a long ramble in the opposite direction. The day was warm, and we trudged along leisurely enough, stopping about midday to eat our lunch upon a great flat rock near the river bank. Afterwards, we sat and smoked a while, resuming our walk only when we were tired of inaction. For perhaps another hour we wandered onward, chatting quietly and comfortably on this and that matter, and on several occasions stopping while my companion, who is something of an artist, made rough sketches of striking bits of the wild scenery. And then, without any warning whatsoever, the river we had followed so confidently came to an abrupt end, vanishing into the earth. "Good Lord," I said, "whoever would have thought of this?" And I stared in amazement. Then I turned to Tonneson. He was looking with a blank expression on his face at the place where the river disappeared. In a moment he spoke. "Let us go for a bit. It may reappear again. Anyhow, it is worth investigating." I agreed, and while we went forward once more, though rather aimlessly, for we were not at all certain which direction to prosecute our search, for perhaps a mile we moved onward, then Tonneson, who had been gazing around curiously, stopped and shaded his eyes. "See," he said after a moment, "isn't that mist or something, over there in the right, away in a line next to that big piece of rock?" A line with that big piece of rock, and then he indicated with his hand. I stared, and after a minute seemed to see something, but could not be certain, and said so. "Anyway," my friend replied, "we'll just go across and have a glance." And he started off in the direction he suggested, I following. Presently, we came across bushes, and after a time, out upon the top of a high, boulder-strewn bank, from which we looked down into a wilderness of bushes and trees. "Seems as though we'd come across an oasis of this desert of stone," muttered... Excuse me. "Seems as though we've come upon an oasis in this desert of stone," muttered Tonneson, as he gazed interestedly. Then he was silent, his eyes fixed, and I looked also, for up from somewhere about the center of the wooded lowland there rose high into the quiet air a great column of haze-like spray, upon which the sun shone, causing innumerable rainbows. "How beautiful!" I exclaimed. "Yes," answered Tonneson thoughtfully. "Must be a waterfall or something over there. Perhaps it's our river come to light again. Let's go and see." Down the sloping bank we made our way and entered among the trees and shrubberries. The bushes were matted and the trees overhung us, so that the place was disagreeably gloomy, though not dark enough to hide from me the fact that many of the trees were fruit trees, and that here and there one could trace indistinctly signs of long-departed cultivation. Thus it came to me that we were making our way through the riot of a great and ancient garden. I said as much to Tonneson, and he agreed that there certainly seemed to be reasonable grounds for my belief. What a wild place it was, so dismal and somber. Somehow, as we went forward, a sense of the silent loneliness and desertion of the old garden grew upon me, and I felt shivery. One could imagine things lurking through the tangled bushes, while in the very air of the place there seemed something uncanny. I think Tonneson was conscious of this also, though he said nothing. Suddenly we came to a halt. Through the trees there had grown upon our Through the trees there had grown upon our ears a distant sound. Tonneson bent forward, listening. I could hear it more plainly now. It was continuous and harsh, a sort of droning roar, something to come from far away. I experienced a queer, indescribable little feeling of nervousness. What sort of place was it into which we had got? I looked at my companion to see what he thought of the matter, and noted that there was only puzzlement in his face, and then, as I watched his features, an expression of comprehension crept over them, and he nodded his head. "That's a waterfall," he exclaimed, without conviction. "I know the sound now." And he began to push vigorously through the bushes in direction of the noise. As we went forward, the sound became plainer continually, showing that we were headed straight toward it. Steadily the roaring grew louder and nearer until it appeared, as I remarked to Tonneson, almost to come from under our feet. And still we were surrounded by the trees and shrubs. "Take care," Tonneson called to me. "Look where you're going." And then, suddenly, we came out from among the trees onto a great open space where, not 6 paces in front of us, yawned the mouth of a tremendous chasm, from the depths of which the noise appeared to rise, along the continuous mist-like spray that we had witnessed from the top of the distant bank. For quite a minute we stood in silence, staring in bewilderment at the sight. Then my friend went forward cautiously to the edge of the abyss. I followed, and together we looked down through a boil of spray at a monster cataract of frothing water that burst, spouting from the side of the chasm, nearly 100 feet below. "Good Lord!" said Tonneson. I was silent, and rather awed. The sight was so unexpectedly grand and eerie, though this latter quality came more upon me later. Presently I looked up and across the further side of the chasm. There was something towering up from the spray. It looked like a fragment of a great ruin, and I touched Tonneson on the shoulder. He glanced round with a start, and I pointed toward the thing. His gaze followed my finger, and his eyes lighted up with a sudden flash of excitement as the object came within his field of view. "Come along," he said. Excuse me. "Come along," he shouted above the uproar. "We'll have a look at it. There's something queer about this place. I feel it in my bones." And he started off round the edges of the crater-like abyss. As we neared this new thing, I saw that I had not been mistaken in my first impression. It was undoubtedly a portion of some ruined building, yet now as I made out that it was not built upon the edge of the chasm itself, as I had at first supposed, but perched almost at the extreme end of a huge spur of rock that jutted out some 50 or 60 feet over the abyss. In fact, the jagged mass of ruins was literally suspended in midair. Arriving opposite it, we walked out into the projecting arm of rock, and I must confess to having felt an intolerable sense of terror as I looked down from that dizzy perch into the unknown depths below us, into the deeps from which there rose ever the thunder of falling water and the shroud of rising spray. Reaching the ruin, we clambered round it cautiously, and on the further side came upon a mass of fallen stones and rubble. The ruin itself seemed to me, as I proceeded now to examine it minutely, to be a portion of the outer wall of some prodigious structure. It was so thick and substantially built, yet what was it doing in such a position I could by no means conjecture. Where was the rest of the house, or castle, or whatever it had been? I went back to the outer side of the wall, and thence to the edge of the chasm, leaving Tonneson rooting systematically among the heaps of stones and rubbish on the outer side. Then I commenced to examine the surface of the ground, near the edge of the abyss, to see whether there were not left other remnants of the building with which the fragment of ruin evidently belonged. Okay, Mooney, have a good nap. I think we'll probably keep going to the end of this chapter, and that'll probably be enough for this reading, but we'll see. I could see... Where did I leave off? But though I scrutinized the earth with the greatest care, I could see no signs of anything to show that there had ever been a building erected on the spot, and I grew more puzzled than ever. Then I heard a cry from Tonneson. He was shouting my name excitedly, and without delay I hurried along the rocky promontory to the ruin. I wondered whether he had hurt himself, and then the thought came that perhaps he had found something. I reached the crumbled wall and climbed around. There I found Tonneson standing within a small excavation that he had made among the debris. He was brushing the dirt from something that looked like a book, much crumpled and dilapidated, and opening his mouth every second or two to bellow my name. As soon as he saw that I had come, he handed his prize to me, telling me to put it in my satchel so as to protect it from the damp, while he continued his explorations. This I did, first, however, running the pages through my fingers, and noting they were closely filled with neat, old-fashioned writing which was quite legible, save in one portion where many of the pages were almost destroyed, being muddied and crumpled, as though the book had been doubled back at that part. This, I found out from Tonneson, was actually as he had discovered it, and the damage was due, probably, to the fall of masonry upon the open part. Curiously, though, the book was fairly dry, which I attributed to its having been so securely buried amongst the ruins. Having put the volume away safely, I turned to and gave Tonneson a hand with his self-imposed task of excavating. Yet, though we put in over an hour of hours of hard work, turning over the whole of the upheaved stones and rubbish, we came upon nothing more than some fragments of broken wood that might have been parts of a desk or table, and so we gave up searching, and went back through the rock once more to the safety of the land. The next thing we did was to make a complete tour of the tremendous chasm, which we were able to observe was in the form of an almost perfect circle, save for where the ruin-crowned spur of rock jutted out, spoiling its symmetry. The abyss was, as Tonneson put it, like nothing so much as a gigantic well or pit going sheer down into the bowels of the earth. For some time longer we continued to stare about us, and then noticing there was a clear space away to the north of the chasm, we bent our steps in that direction. Here, distant to the mouth of the mighty pit of some hundreds of yards, we came upon a great lake of silent water. Silent, that is, save for the one place where there was a continuous bubbling and gurgling. Now, being away from the noise of the spouting cataract, we were able to hear one another speak without having to shout at the tops of our voices, and I asked Tonneson what he thought of the place. I told him that I didn't like it, and the sooner we got out of here the better. I should be pleased. He nodded in reply and glanced at the woods behind furtively. I asked him if he had seen or heard anything. He made no answer, but stood silent as though listening, and I kept quiet also. Suddenly, he spoke. "Hark!" he said sharply. I looked at him, and then away among the trees and bushes, holding my breath involuntarily. A minute came and went in sustained silence, yet I could hear nothing. And I turned to Tonneson to say as much, and then, even as I opened my lips to speak, there came a strange wailing noise out of the wood to our left. It appeared to float through the trees, and there was a rustle of stirring leaves, and then silence. Well, I don't think they built the chasm, Tony. I don't even think you could build the rock going out into the chasm. But other than that, like, hell yeah, if you found that place, you'd be like, well, I'm building something holy here, because this place is rad. All at once, Tonneson spoke and put his hand on my shoulder. "Let us get out of here," he said, and began to move slowly toward where the surrounding trees and bushes seemed thinnest. As I followed him, it came to me suddenly that the sun was low, and there was a raw sense of chilliness in the air. Tonneson said nothing further, but kept on steadily. We were among the trees now, and I glanced around nervously, but saw nothing, save the quiet branches and trunks and the tangled bushes. Onward we went, and no sound broke the silence, except the occasional sapping of a twig under our feet as we moved forward. Yet, in spite of the quietness, I had a horrible feeling that we were not alone, and I kept so close to Tonneson that twice I kicked his heels clumsily, though he said nothing. A minute, and then another, and we reached the confines of the wood, coming out at last upon the bare rockiness of the countryside. Only then was I able to shake off the haunting dread that followed me among the trees. Once, as we moved away, seemed to come again a distant sound of wailing, and I said to myself that it was the wind, yet the evening was breathless. Presently, Tonneson began to talk. "Look you," he said with decision, "I would not spend the night in that place for all the wealth the world holds. There's something unholy, diabolical about it. It came to me all in that moment, just after you spoke. It seemed to me that the woods were full of vile things, you know." "Yes," I answered, and looked back toward the place, but it was hidden from us by a rise in the ground. "There's the book," I said, and I put it in my hand in the satchel. "You got it safely?" he questioned, with a sudden access of anxiety. "Yes," I replied. "Perhaps," he continued, "we shall learn something from it when we get back to the tent. We'd better hurry, too. We're a long way off still, and I don't fancy now being caught out here in the dark." It was 2 hours later when we reached the tent, and without delay we set to work to prepare a meal, for we had eaten nothing since our lunch at midday. Supper over, we cleared the things out of the way and lit our pipes. Then Tonneson asked me to get the manuscript out of my satchel. This I did, and then, as we could not both read from it at the same time, he suggested that I should read the thing out loud. "And mind," he said, he cautioned, knowing my propensities, "don't go skipping half the book." Little smartass from the author. Nice. Yet, had he known what it contained, he would have realized how needless such advice was, for once at least. And there, seated in the opening of our little tent, I began the strange tale of the house on the Borderland, for such was the title of the MS. And this is told in the following pages. All of this was preamble. Oh. So this was written from the perspective of our author. Okay, what's our time at? Yeah, I thought we were in the story, but nah, dog. We were. This is the framing device, if you will. Go. Yeah, no, I'm kind of digging it though. I'm excited to see what the rest of it it has, but I don't want to go too long, and I don't think we have like 10. We're like 10 minutes off from as long as I kind of wanted to go. But yeah, so let me do this. Yeah, I'm glad you guys liked it. So I'm not sure if I want to do this once a week. I probably am also going to do some other like more traditional streaming. I have some other stuff I want to do. I'm thinking on Fridays about doing like I bought the big Itch.io bundle for the big, I can't even remember what it's called, the Black Lives Matter bundle, that thing. I kind of want to go through and like do a stream on each of those games, just because there's like so many different little interesting ones. If people would be interested in that, I don't know. Would you guys like me to do this like twice a week, the reading, or is Sunday? You think that's plenty or what? I know I have a schedule listed underneath the in the about page, but like that's tentative. Once would be plenty. Okay, yeah, once a week. That'd be good. I mean, that's fair. It'd be a nice thing to do on Sunday evenings. We might just do House in the Borderlands, like, for the full time next week, because I kind of want to see where that's going. We'll see. I'll probably find some, like, some short stories and stuff to fill out that. We might return to Ghost Story, or what's it called? Historic Ghosts and Ghost Hunters. What I'll do is before we pick another one of those, I'll skim it and make sure it's worth reading. Yeah, we'll keep this up. We'll do this next Sunday then. I think most of the people here are already like, huh. Oh yeah, you're thinking about the I can't even remember the name. It's been so long since I've run it. The new one, the one where you're going in underwater to fight Zahaga and stuff. I think next stream will be on Wednesday. I'll do something. I don't know. I want to do kind of like a game that I come back to, like long form. It might not be. Yeah, no. The Yellow Wallpaper is so good. It's definitely a story that benefits from sort of like reading and rereading. It's really good. There's a whole lot of grist that you can get out of that. Well, anyway, thanks y'all for like coming. Right, I was gonna say, I think pretty much everybody here watching is followed, but I'm trying to get up to affiliate, which means I need, let me get back to that, which means I need like 40 people following, so I would really appreciate if you think anybody would like my kind of stuff, send them. Say like, hey, come watch my buddy Stony. Give them a follow.
The pin.
Because I still need like another 15 or so, I think. I don't think I'll have trouble hitting the concurrent followers, definitely, with like
That's not my business.
everybody coming to help me out, which I really appreciate, you guys.
I should like to help everyone if possible.
But Tony, I'm not sure what I want to stream. There's a couple of games that like
We all want to help
I
one
do
another.
replay occasionally.
But we have lost the way.
There is one that comes to mind. I do occasionally do a playthrough of, if you've ever heard of, what is it? The names of these games are so complicated. It's Star Wars Jedi Knight 2, I think. But I do it with a mod that just gives you the lightsaber from the start and throws in a lot more lightsaber fights. It's a fun, goofy little game. I'm thinking about that. If not, it will be something sort of like that like will take a little while to get through. But I'm definitely open to suggestions if there's anything you guys want to see. I'll also have people on for those streams, since it won't be like reading out loud. But yeah, that will be on Wednesday. But I think that is it for me tonight. Thanks for coming, y'all.